back on July 26th of 2004, and I've always wanted to talk about this. So I'm glad you're here with me as someone who probably, quite frankly, didn't see it. In the Mellon Arena in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Ric Flair and Bruno Sammartino almost had, basically had mythical non-confrontation when they both claimed they were snubbed by the other person. Bruno claimed that Flair slunk or slinked away, I guess, however you want to say it, from Bruno when Flair saw him backstage, and then Ric Flair said that Bruno refused to shake Ric Flair's hand after Ric had basically crapped all over him in his autobiography that was either out that year or the year before. I can't remember if it was 2003 or 2004. Do you know anything of this backstage incident?
I do know about it in retrospect because Bruno did an interview that I watched. By the way, I was always a big fan of Bruno. He was such a gentleman, even when he came to independent shows. He would always come to visit Tom Brandy and other people, and I would be there. I got to find a picture. We have a picture of all of us, and I'm just like a little kid with Bruno. And talking to Bruno, he was always just a normal person in wrestling. That's what he felt like to me. I don't know any dealings when he worked, politics, any of that stuff. But I do remember the interview talking about this at the Mellon Arena. And basically, Bruno, from my recollection of the interview, had brought a camera crew, a local camera crew. He was being interviewed. I guess they were doing some sort of piece on him or documentary type thing. And he was busy with that. And there was part of him that said he didn't even see Ric Flair in the same vicinity. Am I remembering this correctly?
You tell me.
That this is just based on an interview that I saw on YouTube with him where he said, I didn't even see him. And then he talked about the autobiography and he goes, why would I shake his hand when he buried me? Or he spoke negatively about me. Why would I shake someone's hand that did? So he didn't admit to doing it because he was so busy with the camera crew. But then again, why would he? So he's saying, yeah, Flair, and Flair's instincts probably would be, why would I go up to, and why would Flair go up to Bruno knowing he buried him? And Bruno knowing Flair buried him in the book? Because Bruno stayed up with this stuff to some degree. He was aware of it. Ric Flair, there's a compilation from TSN, the Canadian Sports Network, and that guy who interviewed all the wrestlers back in the day, and Vince. Where,
off the record or something.
Yeah, off TSN, off the record. And he would bury everybody, Brad and Hogan, and it was like literally Ric Flair's buries the world type thing. There's a Bret Hart version too of buries the world. But
I've got one for you that really bugged me about Ric Flair. This was in 2003 or something like that. He was doing an interview
he buried Mick
with
Foley
Silvervision.
too, by the way. Glorified stuntman.
Oh God, yeah.
I'm just saying. Go ahead.
Yeah. Ended up working together.
Ended up being friendly. I just talked about it with the the stuff after years.
Ric Flair was such a butthole to Mick Foley, to his face, and on interviews so many times. Yet Mick is still nice to him. I don't even know why. But Ric Flair gave an interview with a company called Silvervision. They did the distribution for all the DVDs and VHSs in the UK and Europe for all WWE, home media kind of stuff. And the interviewer uses the word like heel or something like that in the interview. And Ric Flair stops him and says, you don't have the right to use the word heel. The only person who is not in the business who has the right to use inside terminology is Dave Meltzer. And I can't remember if I begrudgingly agree with him or I was like, dude, it's the 2000s. At this point, everyone's got the internet.
I mean, what would you rather have? This is my famous thing that I do, like my pet peeve. Would you rather have somebody using wrestling terminology? And if you turn around and say, we do it sometimes for people to just tune in. Hey, by the way, a heel is a bad guy. It's just our wrestling terminology to kind of address that. That's our term or vocabulary that we speak. Would you rather have that and say, so Ric Flair, you're body slamming your way into town. How about you suplex me with one of your figure fives? It would say, like figure four, is that like half a figure eight in speed skating or what? You see what I mean? You can make a lie, you can goof on somebody, but when you're trying to say, not, hey, I know the business, brother, you're basically just using terminology that the wrestler would be comfortable with. I'm just guessing, right? It's not like you said, hey, it's like a heel, not the back of my foot. Wink, wink. Let's suplex our way into the next segment.
Yes, it's pretty much that, I think. But I don't know. It's one of those
Ric
things
Flair,
where I do it, and it I annoy myself.
Here's the thing, and we've all been there as wrestlers. I've had my dark times where you're frustrated, you're angry, you're annoyed, and it just consumes you so much. Ric Flair, sometimes it looks like he just needs an excuse to have an anger outlet at something, or he just wants to get angry and let it out. Whether it's a pizza place, an interview, or I got to go to that pizza place, by the way, in Gainesville. I plan to do it. There's different things that just make people angry, but in the end, it just stretches you out. And Rick has enough medical problems. Hopefully, in this day and age, he's not going to get angry. Of course, I haven't bumped into him. Maybe he'll get angry at me. But it just feels like he gets very angry and resentful towards other people. Bruno's one of the greatest to ever do it. And guess what? Flair's one of the greatest to ever do it. Why can't we just have both being equally as great for the fans of their generation?
I'll tell you why, because I'm going to give you the quote now, and then I'm going to ask you about Bruno.
If I could say one more thing, just like the Ricky Steamboat thing during the best and worst agents, I love watching Ric Flair matches during cardio. Flair versus Steamboat, Flair versus Luger. What else was another one? Hey, Flair versus Shawn at WrestleMania. Flair versus Taker at WrestleMania, 17? And Shawn was 24?
18.
18, I'm sorry. 18 was Toronto, yeah. 24 was Orlando. I love watching Ric Flair matches, especially the ones where him and Steamboat there's no rest holds. They're going. So I can separate the person from the talent, and I wish that Bruno and Flair, in a way, could both do that as well.
So here's what Ric Flair, or really his ghostwriter, wrote, because every word did not have a capital letter in his book, so I must presume
did it
was
end
a
the
ghostwriter.
book with woo?
I never got to the end of it, unsurprisingly. Anyway, he had nothing kind to say about Bruno Sammartino. Bear with me, everybody. There's a few paragraphs. Bruno definitely generated intensity, and the fans in the Northeast went crazy for him. I have to admit, though, that I was far from overwhelmed. He was a tremendous draw, a great spokesman for the guys, but not a good in-ring performer. Sammartino could put an opponent in a bear hug or lift him over his back, but he was limited, especially compared to NWA champions like Harley Race, Dory Funk, Jack Briscoe, etc. He also makes allusions that he was always number one in the PWI years because they were based in New York as well. Next paragraph. I recognise that Bruno was loved in New York, Boston, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and other WWF cities, where the people were very conscious of their immigrants' roots and enjoyed seeing an ethnic champion. But my opinion is Pedro Morales was better. They worked different territories, but when Sammartino went to St. Louis, where the NWA was headquartered, nobody cared because he was so far below the standards of wrestlers they knew as champions. With all the fond memories his fans have, Bruno should still be regarded as a hero, even though he's become a bitter man who has spent so much of his retirement burying the business that gave him the money and fame. It's just ludicrous. I've told my second wife, Beth, more about her later, that if she outlives me, I never want her criticising professional wrestling. It's because of the professional wrestling, blah, 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 she's talking about. Bruno should be able to enjoy the things, but, he's bitter, etc. But to characterise Bruno as great, a term that's thrown around much too liberally, he found an affront to that, calling Bruno as great. And then Bruno, in an interview later, would call Ric Flair a liar and stated, I do not respect Ric Flair, I don't respect him at all, and called him a poor ambassador for the wrestling business. Taking into all that, Bruno was limited. Who cares?
Every professional wrestler is limited. Ric Flair's limited. I'm limited. Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, Triple H, Hulk Hogan, Stone Cold Steve Austin. Basically, what Bruno did was bring the authentic Bruno Sammartino. And of course, I said it before, Italian-American champion, Italian-American demographic, Madison Square Garden, he sells out every time. What's wrong with that? I've watched Bruno and Pedro Morales both work in matches on YouTube. They're equally as limited and equally as over in their ethnicity. Obviously, Pedro was the champion for his demographic, so was Bruno. That's how they booked. So you think WWE buying AAA wrestling isn't going to feature Rey Mysterio and all the other, Mexican and Latin American wrestlers and luchadors? That's what draws the demographics for that region. I watched the Bruno interview where he told Ric Flair and talked a little bit about him being just not a great ambassador because of his habits, his personal life. Obviously, he's been famous for having the robe in hotel bars and having nothing on underneath and dressing on or dancing on the bars. I think Bruno even alluded to some of that stuff in that interview. So both are great talents. Both drew immense amounts of money. But from a personal level, I'd much rather be around a person like Bruno Sammartino than Ric Flair every day of the week.
Now, you said you met Bruno Sammartino. Thing is, he's not hometown, I know, because you're Philadelphia, he's Pittsburgh, or he's Italy, really, Abruzzo, Italy. But, he made Pittsburgh his home, and he's a hometown hero to everybody there. But he's your state town hero, if that makes sense. Home state hero, I guess, is what I'm saying. Were you ever like a huge Bruno fan back in the day? Or were you more NWA and etc.?
No, I obviously, after I got into the business, I had to look back at the Gorgeous George era or any kind of, and YouTube wasn't around either. So a lot of the Bruno stuff was VHS tapes. That's how old I am. And then growing a greater appreciation, obviously doing this show, I will look up classic wrestling just to see the Antonio Rocas, who else? Freddie Blassie, Bobo Brazil, Ernie Ladd, all these different talents, and even the older Japanese wrestlers, just to see what Japanese wrestling was like way back when. And then now you're getting me more to look at World of Sport, which meeting Robbie Brookside was one of the highlights of my life, not just my career. Such a nice dude when I went down to the Performance Center, but he told me some stories, and I got to see Dave Taylor and Steve Regal before he was William Regal, all these different like treasures within the business over the generations, eras, and decades. But I was never a Bruno Sammartino fan until I became more of a worker to be aware of how over he is. But one thing's for sure, on the independents, and this is after my WWE runs that I bump into him, so I was kind of more in tune. He was a gentleman. He was a normal guy. You ask a question, you get an honest answer. Can I get a picture with you? Very gracious. Very much that way. And it wasn't in Philadelphia, but it was somewhere in between, I think, and he was booked for the show. So he was not showing up visiting friends. He was booked for an autograph session. So I was going to take advantage of getting to know him a little bit. And Tom Brandi knew him a whole lot better and spoke to him and always sung his praises. So a fan of him as a worker, but more of a fan of him as a human being. And loved when he said, I just wake up in the morning and I sit at my dining room table or my kitchen table. I read the paper, I have my coffee and I have some eggs, and I go get a workout in. And it reminded me of Bob Armstrong, which, by the way, Bob Armstrong also great worker, but an even better dude, a better guy, all the Armstrongs. Bob, this was like, I get goosebumps from this. Bob would tell me, this is how old school he was with working out. When he went to the gym, he would pack a lunch in a metal lunch pail. He would spend that much time in the gym working out and obviously talking to people and enjoying the environment. But he was like, I pack a lunch. I'm like, that's incredible that you're that much. I was like, I never thought I'd meet somebody who loves working out more than me. But Bob Armstrong, another guy that's gone, and it's sad.
Yeah, some of the hugest arms ever on a wrestler, Bob Armstrong. For people who don't know, he's the father of Road Dogg, as well as, Brian, Scott, and Steve as well, of the Armstrong wrestling family. Just going back to Bruno one more time before we go on to the news, is even though you weren't like a big fan of him at the time, and he's not like a super tall dude as far as I can tell, maybe like 5'10", very wide, obviously, very stocky. Is he someone that even if you didn't really know who he was or, grew up as a fan and everything, has he just got that aura?
Yeah, and actually he's very unassuming and you would say maybe introverted in a public setting and very quiet and not making everybody know that Bruno Sammartino's here. But the presence, the poise, and I think you may not guess he's a wrestler unless you look at him. You're like, well, obviously that's Bruno Sammartino, who doesn't know him? But if you didn't know him, you'd be like, is that like one of the legends of strongman competition? Is that a legendary powerlifting champion? Like you would know by looking at him this guy did something outside 9 to 5. I need to know what it is. And you gravitate towards that.